Hi there. Welcome to A New Way to Museum. My name is David Levering. I run the science camps at the Sternberg, as well as our virtual museum on GatherTown. In this series of videos, we're going to be taking a tour of some parts of the virtual museum, and we will also be talking with some Sternberg Museum staff, as well as some outside paleontologists about their work, some of the work that they do that involves the Sternberg Museum, and generally have a good time exploring paleontology in this virtual world. This episode, our guest is Sternberg Museum paleontologist and chief curator, Dr. Laura Wilson. Let's go say hi. Hi there, Dr. Wilson. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. What are you doing up here in the galleries?
I was checking out some information about Protostega, a really cool sea turtle that lived in Kansas about 85 million years ago.
Oh, okay, yeah, we'll bring that up. So I understand that you've been actually doing some sea turtle research more recently. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, one of the things that I really enjoy from a research perspective is putting together ancient ecosystems and understanding how animals reacted with each or animals interacted with each other and how they interacted with the environment in which they live. I've spent a lot of time working on these really cool seabirds called Hesperornis. And more recently, I've gotten into working on sea turtles, specifically Protostega. One of the really cool things about working with fossil sea turtles is that we have living sea turtles today. So, one of the things that I like to do in my research is I do a lot of comparisons between extinct animals and their habitats and modern animals and their habitats. So, I've been able to look at Protostega, try to figure out how it grew, how it lived its life, its metabolism, all those cool things. And it's been very convenient to have modern sea turtles to get to compare against so I can actually better understand what's going on with the fossil record.
So what are you actually comparing when you're doing this work? Like we only have the fossil bones and pieces of these prehistoric sea turtles. How are you drawing those lines between just skeletons and fully fleshed out living things?
So surprisingly, or not, I'm using the bones. So one of the research tools that I use is called osteohistology or bone histology, which is the study of bone tissue. So I take the bones. I've been working with the humerus, which is the upper arm bone, and the femur, which is the upper leg bone. And I take these bones and I actually cut them up. So yes, I'm permanently altering them, but I'm also getting information that you absolutely cannot get outside of this type of research. So I take these bones and I cut them up and I put them on glass slides to look at them under microscope. And one of the really cool things about looking at bones under microscope is that their tissue structure preserves and looks just like modern bones. So a recently dead animal, if you cut it up and looked at its bones in the same way, they look very similar and the same types of structures preserve in fossils as that we see in modern. So I take the bones of the fossil sea turtles and I cut them open and I look at the bone patterns to see how they're growing. And one of the questions I'm really interested in is metabolism. So is there evidence that sea turtles had a traditional kind of slow growing metabolism like we associate with quote unquote cold blooded animals like lizards and snakes and other types of reptiles, or do they have a more elevated metabolism and growing very quick because these are very big sea turtles? So are
Right.
they taking 50 or 100 years to reach full body size, or are they doing in maybe 10 or 20 years? And that has big implications for when they're able to reach what we call sexual maturity, so the point where they can start reproducing, and all ties into the idea of understanding a life history of an organism. So how it grew, how quickly it grew, when it reached adult body size, when it reached sexual maturity and ability to reproduce, and all those cool questions. And so I'm working on these fossil sea turtle bones and I'm comparing them to modern sea turtles because there's actually been a lot of research looking at the tissue structure, the bone tissue structure of modern sea turtles. And I can actually piece together where, compared to different modern sea turtle species, do these fossil ones fit in
Mhm.
regarding metabolism. So there's some pretty cool analyses and results that I'm starting to get.
So when you say saw these bones up, are we talking about like something you can get at Home Depot? We've had saws for a really long time. We've had microscopes. Is this something that's fairly new? How is this happening?
So, I mean, osteohistology, bone histology has been around for a long time. We use it in the medical fields to understand. A lot of times we use the soft tissue. So, like an organ tissue or muscle tissues to look at pathologies and cancers and stuff like that. But we can look at bones as well. This has been applied to animals for decades and decades, and it really started being applied to dinosaurs in maybe like the late 1990s, which is where we really got to see this push through the 2000s and the early
Oh,
2000s for applying this to dinosaurs. One of the issues with applying it to dinosaurs is that we're trying to interpret fossil bones without really understanding what modern animals are doing regarding bone growth. So now we're kind of actually taking a step back in the past 10 years or so and starting to study the modern animals and what modern mammals and what modern birds and what modern reptiles, archosaurs, or crocodilians, how they're growing their bones so that we can better ground truth our
okay.
interpretations for fossil vertebrates. Regarding the methods, yes and no. In terms of, is it specialized equipment? And that depends on what size of bone I'm sampling. So I have a big sea turtle, like a foot long sea turtle bone that's really big. I actually use a tile saw. So yes, I
Oh,
have a
okay.
tile saw that I literally bought at Home Depot. That sprays water and cuts to keep everything lubricated, so I can take a chunk out of the big bone. That obviously isn't going to work if I have like a little tiny bird bone or even a little tiny bird or turtle bone, because of the vibrations and the size of the blade itself is going to be too destructive.
Sure.
So then, the smaller the thing, the more expensive it costs. So then I have to get kind of these more specialized saws that I use for precision cutting that have really thin, kind of diamond encrusted blades that don't create as much vibration. So I can make really small, kind of like sub or a couple of millimeter thick cuts out of either smaller bones or segments of big bones. So I
Okay.
kind of use a combination depending on the size of the sample I'm studying.
So you said that a lot of this is only maybe the past 10 to 20 years, which really started to get some momentum behind it as a research field for paleontology. How do you how are you going about coming up with new research questions? Is it very much based in trying to expand our understanding of prehistoric extinct animal like physiology and biology?
In a lot of ways, yeah. So I mean, because I do so much comparisons to modern, I'm very interested in the applications that my research um, can be used to understand changing climate today, and even into the sea turtle specific, a field called conservation paleobiology. So actually using what we interpret from the fossil record from animals that have adapted to, in this case, warm climates. The late Cretaceous, when these turtles lived, was a greenhouse environment, much much warmer than today. No polar ice caps, so no long-term glaciers or anything like that. So I'm really interested in terms of what we can glean from the past to better understand the present and preserve and predict the future. So that's directed some in terms of how are these animals different and what does that mean. Other things, again, I really like these ecosystem scale studies. So, kind of using a specific animal or a group of animals to put together an ecosystem. And then I can trace how ecosystems change through time, how they change with latitude, so in different climatic regimes and things like that. So, I have a very much kind of big picture approach to my research and how are these animals living their lives? How does a changing climate or a changing food web influence their evolution? And then I kind of, maybe either get a target animal or get a target ecosystem that I then use to kind of try to figure out how I can actually ask a question
Hmm.
that can be answered. And that's been one of the issues, I think, with kind of paleoecology as a field as a whole, is we have really cool questions, but it's very, very difficult to answer them because there's so many moving pieces when you're talking about an ecosystem. And so kind of trying to find a way to either use one aspect of the biology of an organism or something like that is a bit more challenging to actually get a testable question or a testable hypothesis that can be used to explore past and present and future life.
So you mentioned that this is kind of can be a difficult nut to crack, so to speak. Let's say that you had an unlimited budget to tackle any one particular problem in this entire scenario. It could be lab equipment, it could be field work, it could be whatever you want, but it's just one project. Where would you direct that unlimited pipe of money at?
So at this point, money is not the issue, it's time.
Okay.
So it would be a time, like maybe the money to buy my time to answer questions. And it's really kind of what I'm really getting interested in. And when I started this project with Protostega, I did not see my research going this way, but I'm really interested in the conservation paleobiology aspect. So what can I do as a paleontologist to help protect endangered sea turtles today by understanding their evolution under changing climates? So I would love to expand the research that I'm doing with Protostega and look at the evolution of the lineage. So Protostega is really, really cool because its bone patterns look very similar to leatherback sea turtles. And leatherback sea turtles grow very differently than all other living sea turtles. They have they're not warm-blooded, but they have a more elevated metabolism. So they're growing very quickly and reaching a very large body size very quickly, which is very non-reptilian if we think of lizards and snakes and things like that. And that's very different than like the green sea turtles or the loggerhead sea turtles that have the very much slow and steady wins the race type of growth patterns. And in addition to Protostega, I've also cut a much more basal, so kind of like lower down, I hate that term, but lower down on the evolutionary tree, something that isn't as derived, isn't as kind of advanced or as modern as Protostega. And it has a very different growth pattern. So even though it's pretty closely related to Protostega, it has a different growth pattern. And it grew more similarly to what we see in all of these other sea turtles, the greens and the loggerheads, with a slower growth rate. So what I really like to do is kind of be able to get into unpacking what's going on within the evolutionary lineage when we see the changes in growth rate and why. Is there something going on environmentally that's either triggering faster growth? Is it accompanying a bigger body size? And then if it is, then why are they evolving a different body size? Is it due to predator-prey interactions? Is it the fact that, kind of the survival or large body size is a great way to not get eaten from a survival predator-prey interaction, evolutionary pressure. And so, start unpacking some of those. So kind of the time, yes, there's going to be financial resources, access to specimens, but kind of looking to see how and where there are changes within the lineage of these sea turtles to then figure out, okay, what's the future of modern sea turtles under changing climate, under changing ecosystems, because I think another aspect is not only what's going on with protostegas in Kansas, but what protostegas are kind of found all over the place. So what's going on with protostegas from the east coast of the late Cretaceous, which is a very different ecosystem than what we have in the western interior seaway of Kansas. And so if we start seeing differences in these fossils at a population scale, so multiple individuals of the same species sharing a habitat, do we see differences in how these animals are growing and living their lives and maturing based on just kind of geographic distribution? Because we do see patterns like that in modern sea turtles. So
Mhm.
I'm really interested, throwing my resources at these questions that get at what are these extinct animals doing evolutionarily, what are some of the possible causes of those changes, and how can that help us inform conservation biology decisions that we need to do today, need to make today.
So at the Sternberg, like you are the paleontologist of the Sternberg Museum. You're the curator. You do a lot of interaction with the public and education as well, not just teaching classes, but education with just our community. So when you're taking all of this relatively new information and styles of research and that you're doing and communicating that to the general public, if we have like an aspiring museum scientist or museum educator watching this, do you have any recommendations for them on taking kind of these big complicated chunks of information and distilling it down to make non-scientist members of the public really care about it?
You know, so that's something that we're just now starting to tackle. So much of science communication has been, do your research, publish a paper, and let it go. And that does nothing to distill, like you're talking about, distill the results, distill the importance to, a non-scientist or even a non-paleontologist. I'm sure
Sure.
there are a lot of,
Sure.
like plant biologists out there who don't really care what sea turtles are doing, or fossil sea turtles. Everybody cares about modern sea turtles. So it's very difficult, and I think it's figuring out how to relate your research to other people's interests, and you're never going to be able to find one silver bullet that's going to impact every person. But I do think that the conservation aspect definitely pulls this research into the present to relate to more people, because a lot of people maybe don't see the impact that studying 85 million year old sea turtles in a place where there is no ocean anymore is relevant to their lives or things that they care about. But when you can relate it to modern conservation with either or grabbing the interest in terms of the type of questions, the type of organisms, maybe it's just people don't know how big these sea turtles were. Like, they're huge, they're bigger, than the average person. So much bigger than anything we have today. So I think, it's not just a one and done in terms of, I'm going to throw out a tweet and, all of a sudden everybody's going to care. But it's finding different ways to tell the same story that can relate to different audiences. And honestly, it's the same thing that we do in a classroom. Like, if I explain something to a student and they don't understand it, I have to find a new way to explain it to them, a new
Sure.
way to relate it to their life. I can't just say the same words over and over and think that all of a sudden it's going to click. And so it's really the same thing in kind of informal or non-formal science communication, that, maybe it's talking about body size and just how cool these are. And that's going to grab people because they're like, well, I did not know turtles got that
Right.
big. And they're like, why are they big? How are that big? Like, what are they like today? And you start asking those questions, and maybe somebody else, like, well, I can study this, but look at this cute little baby sea turtle hatching on a beach. It's like, let's get to the cute turtle photos. And so, there are different ways, and you don't want it to sound gimmicky, because that devalues our research as scientists, and also devalues the public that's absorbing them, and trivializes their interests. But, kind of, again, telling the same story in different ways to relate to different people's interests.
You mentioned Twitter. If folks want to hear more from Dr. Wilson or her research group, we'll make sure that those Twitter profiles are under her photo right there. You can go check those out and hear from her about the work she does and the work that is being done at the Sternberg Museum and the Paleontology Department. Dr. Wilson, it was great to see you. I'm going to head over to the other side of the gallery. We're going to learn a little bit more about mosasaurs. Is there anything else you want to leave people with before we close out?
My gosh, I don't know. There's so many cool things out there, ask questions. That's my always big thing. If you're interested in something, ask why, ask how, ask who cares and why we should care. That's the basis of science, of just asking questions and figuring out how to answer them. So don't let people tell you can't do something or you shouldn't be interested in something. So just keep asking questions and trying to find answers.
Good words to live by. All right, take care. We'll see you later.
Great. Thanks, David.
Thanks for joining me for this new episode of A New Way to Museum. Please like and subscribe and stay tuned for new episodes every week. If you'd like to visit our virtual museum yourself, you can do so via the link in the description below this video. Have a great day, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for joining us in A New Way to Museum with the Sternberg Museum of Natural History. If you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell for notifications when we release a new video. Support us on Patreon for early access and exclusive content. You can also follow us on all our social media. Links are found in the description. Thanks for watching, and follow your curiosity to new discoveries.